In this video, we're going to be looking at how to use PBR Painter with multiple objects or multiple materials within the same object. And so this video will go through the kind of workflow that you can use for this type of scenario. So we're going to start with multiple objects and then we'll move on later to the multiple materials scenario. I'm going to use the monkey head as a simple example, and what I will do is just turn this into multiple objects. And I'll do that by pressing Tab, going to Mesh, and selecting Separate by Loose Parts. Basically, that means that I'm going to get a different object for my head and for each of the eyes, because these are separate loose parts. So when you're working with multiple objects in PBR Painter and your goal is to basically bake your end material into a single set of image textures, which is a common workflow, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you have a common UV map for all of your different parts. So in this case I do, because all of these came from the original UV map for this particular monkey head. As we can see, there's no overlapping parts to this UV map. And this is really important for ultimately baking down our layers into a set of image textures. At this point, you can go ahead and use whatever methods that you'd like to create your different materials for your different objects. So I'm going to do something really simple for this video, and I'm going to create just a single layer for each of these different objects. So I'm going to make the head one color, and they're all going the same color because they all share a common material at the moment. But if I give a different material to this eye, and I'm just going to create a different layer for each of these ones, just to kind of give the example of what workflow you would then use for baking and things like that. So once you have your final materials, so say you've gone and actually created all of these properly using PBR Painter, and you've got all of your different objects with your unique material in each one, the only thing left to do is to bake these. And regardless of which object you have selected, you can go to baking and then exporting. You can follow all the exact same normal workflows that you would use in PBR Painter. But now when we click bake, this option of baking all selected objects to a single material becomes available once we've selected more than one object. So if I then select these different objects that I want to bake, and I click bake, I can now tick this. And so when I click OK and bake this, what's going to happen is it's going to bake all of these different objects. And as you can see, it's now baked all of these different objects to a single image. So in this case, this is the metallic. So there was a metallic of 1 on the head and the ears and a 0 on the eyes. But you can also see with the base color, it's now correctly baked this whole thing into this simple set of images. And that's it. So that's as simple as it is in order to work with multiple objects using PBR Painter. So just to recap, you just need to make sure that your UV map is correct and they're not overlapping so that you can do that baking. Then you can work on your materials independently, and at the end, just select them all and then bake. And just make sure when you click bake that you select this option to bake all your selected objects to a single material. Now we're going to look at using multiple material slots and multiple materials rather than using multiple objects. So I'm just going to select these objects and press Ctrl J and now join them together. And because they started as separate objects with separate materials, I've now got these actual materials added automatically to different slots. But I'm just going to remove all of these different ones and then set these up again from scratch. If I add a new material to this one and then just have a look at what that looks like, this one's now basically assigned to the eye. And you can change the assignment by just selecting different faces and then selecting the material and clicking assign, like that. And I might just leave that one like that just for the sake of the video. But I'm just going to add new materials to these other ones with different colors so that I can tell them apart. So now it's basically got 3 materials assigned to these different faces on the same mesh. And baking is actually, again, very simple in this case. So again, once you have your final material like this, when you go to baking and click bake, you will have this option to bake all materials on the model. As long as your materials all have a single principled shader, which they will if you're using PBR Painter materials, it will just bake those automatically to a single set of images, just like it did in here. So I'm just going to add some more details in this one. So I'm going to add maybe some different color and then the same thing. And then I'll just do the baking again. And then once again, it's now baking those separately, but it's now baking them into a single image. So it's now combined all the different materials into a single set of images once again. So that's as simple as it is, again, in terms of using multiple material slots and then baking that at the end. One more thing that I wanted to show before I finish up the video is that there is a specific way to hide and show other material slots when you're doing texture painting. So by default in Blender, if you've got materials like this over different slots, if you do a brush stroke over one material and you end up moving on to the other material, it will paint onto whatever image is attached to that other material. So that can be useful if you want to paint across different materials, but it can also be annoying if you only want to paint, say, for example, onto this eye. And so there's a couple of ways that you can get around that, and I'm going to show that now. So let's say, for example, that I'm working on this head material now. Let's say I create a new painted layer. And I want to now do painting just on this head. So I can just paint like that. But if I paint across the other parts of the model, at the moment, it's not doing anything because there's no images in these other materials. But if I had, say, for example, a different painted layer in this material, now what's going to happen is it's automatically painting over those two materials. So there's two main ways to get around this. Number one, if you have a look at the material slots in here, you can click this button to hide other slots. And that will basically hide everything except for this one that you're working on. And that's really useful because now you can just see the material that you're working on and you can freely paint that without the risk of painting over the other ones. And we can show them all again like this. And as you can see, it's now correctly painted everything except for those other material slots. The other thing we can do, if we press Tab, you'll notice when I change between materials, it's automatically selecting the faces for each of these different materials. And if we just turn that back on again, the other useful thing about this is that PBR Painter will automatically switch this on as you go between materials. So this case, it didn't because there's no texture painting on this particular material, but for the two that had texture painting, you can see that you can swap back and forth between the two, do your painting on different ones, and it will automatically detect that and change that for you. So the reason that this is changing is because this is the brush color. So this is a common brush color between both materials. So if you wanted, you could set this as a constant. So if you wanted to paint a constant, you could do that. Then you could swap to the other material and paint a different constant. And then as you can see, as you go back and forth, it's now automatically hiding those other material slots. So that's really valuable if you want to do that. And as soon as you turn that off, it's no longer going to do that hiding. If you want to just paint on one material, but you don't want to hide the other material slots, the other thing you can do is you can use this paint mask in the paint settings over here, which will also be wherever you're painting. So in this case, I'm painting a mask. You'll also have access to this paint mask there. This is basically a built-in feature of Blender, and what it does is it masks your painting based on which faces you have selected in edit mode. The reason it works for PBR Painter when you're swapping between materials is because if we look at edit mode, when you swap between different materials in PBR Painter and you're trying to do this painting, it will automatically select the faces of the material that you're painting. So that way you automatically have masking of other material slots. So again, I'm now painting this material. It's not going to paint over those other slots because I have this face masking on, or this paint masking. Now if I swap back to this material, I've changed my masking to again be able to paint freely onto this slot. So this is a separate way, other than hiding the other slots, that you can do this kind of painting. So this is really nicely set up when you want to do texture painting for different material slots. Okay, and that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about. So to recap, as I said, it's very easy to use multiple objects or multiple material slots and then just bake those into a single set of images. This is all built into PBR Painter's baking. When you're using multiple material slots, it's very well set up to do this kind of painting between different materials. I'm going to end the video there. I hope it was helpful. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in another video. Cheers.